another Kray video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really interested in the Krays, check out our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London. A direct link for the group is in the YouTube description section. We're a friendly and moderated group which has been running since January 2018. Come and give us a try sometime.
Hello, my name is Norman Lucas. I am a British crime journalist and author, known for my work covering high-profile criminal cases and gangland figures. I worked as a crime correspondent for the Sunday Mirror newspaper and wrote several books on true crime subjects. As a crime reporter for the Sunday Mirror, I covered significant crime stories in Britain. I had cultivated sources and contacts within the criminal underworld. Undercover, I worked my way into the inner circle of the notorious Kray twins to gather information for my reporting. Through my books and newspaper reporting, I provided the public with detailed accounts of some of the most shocking and notable crimes in British history, helping to shape public understanding of true crime and its perpetrators. I hope you enjoy my story. In England, as well as in every other country, they are incapable of stamping prostitution out. Known prostitutes are summoned every week or two in England, are fined, and immediately returned to their soliciting. Carmelo Messina admitted possessing a forged passport and a gun, but denied he had ever tried to procure any girl for prostitution. The court spent a week considering its verdict, and then the presiding judge announced the sentence. Eugenia received 7 years imprisonment for procuring Marie Vervaeke Smith and Elizabeth de Meester McCann, and with attempting to procure Anne-Marie Broyneil, using a forged passport and illegally carrying a firearm. Carmelo was in a poor state of health, and with him, the court was more lenient. He was found guilty of using a forged passport and carrying a gun, but was acquitted of the white slavery charges. Because he had already spent 10 months in prison, it was deemed he had served his sentence. But he was ordered to quit Belgium within 24 hours. He announced that he would return to Britain because he was a British subject. The Home Office was guarded when asked to comment upon Carmelo's decision. A spokesman said that his passport had lapsed, and before another was issued, there would be a strict scrutiny of any documents he produced to support his application for a new passport. "No one wants him," added the spokesman. Fortunately for everyone, Carmelo vanished, at least temporarily. A disquieting aspect of the Belgian trial, despite its successful outcome, was that it highlighted the ridiculous state of the law relating to prostitution in Britain. The fine for soliciting, £2, had been fixed more than a century earlier. Prostitutes and their ponces were contemptuous of the law and court appearances, and it was almost impossible for the police to prove cases of procuring. For keepers of disorderly houses, the maximum fine the court could impose was £250 with 6 months imprisonment. From the disclosures made during the Toumai trial of vast untaxed profits, it could be seen that the punishment was no deterrent. Just before the Belgian court returned its verdicts, a shocked House of Commons heard Sir Beverley Baxter, MP for Southgate, tell the Home Secretary, Major Lloyd George, of a guard of dishonour of prostitutes about 3 yards apart, standing on the pavements from Park Lane to Marble Arch. He made his comment after the Home Secretary had once again rejected a demand for immediate action to change the vice laws. Sir Beverley referred to London as the shocking city and told how visitors from the Dominions and other countries saw things in London that were unparalleled in any other civilized capital in the world, in New York, Vienna, or Paris. He suggested that Britain could learn something from Chicago in the way that city had managed to apprehend the gangster Capone on a tax evasion charge. He thought that the Inland Revenue could have demanded a statement of earnings from anyone suspected of running a brothel. Major Lloyd George admitted that the law was easily circumvented, but insisted that, as the Wolfenden Committee was sitting to inquire into homosexuality and prostitution, it would be premature and unwise to legislate at that moment. It is all very well to say that the streets of London must be cleaned up, but what would happen if the police started arresting people against whom they could bring no charge? He asked. He emphasized that a prostitute could only be arrested if she was causing an annoyance, and that to drive prostitutes off the streets would not necessarily be the right answer. He was vague about the real meaning of the word brothel, and thought that there was no evidence that the houses in London mentioned at the Messina trial were being used for immoral purposes. The Home Secretary was merely repeating answers he had given to Mr. Richard Stokes, MP for Ipswich, who a month earlier had asked him what action he proposed to take against the proprietors of the houses. The national press was also demanding that action should be taken against vice-kings, but the Home Secretary remained unshaken. He defended the police, saying that they were neither blind nor negligent. At the same time, the then Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir John Nott-Bower, said that the existing law was hampering police efforts to clean up the West End. He said he knew that there was a growing resentment among officers against allegations of corruption and malpractices in the force. There was disquiet among MPs of all parties and sharp criticism of the Home Secretary for refusing to strengthen the hands of the police. The following December in 1956, Eugenio Messina's appeal against his Belgian sentence was heard, and it was reduced by 7 months, but the sentence of the absent Carmelo was increased by 14 months. The latter was traced to Dublin and later to Belfast, but his movements were mysterious and shadowy, and he was not actually seen until he suddenly reappeared in Britain. Police officers saw him sitting in a car in Knightsbridge on October 3rd, 1958, and he was immediately arrested and charged with illegally entering England without a valid passport. The customary argument arose during the court hearing in November, with the Crown maintaining that he was an Italian and his defense counsel claiming that he was British. The judge at the Old Bailey found for the Crown, imposed a 6 months jail sentence, and an order was made for Carmelo's deportation at the end of his period in prison. When he was released in March 1959, he was driven to London Airport and put aboard a plane for Rome. Then, aged 43 and completely undaunted or perturbed, he cheerfully waved goodbye to his escort of detectives. Arriving at Rome Airport, he was questioned by the police for over 2 hours and taken to Catania, Sicily, for further interviews by the police there. Within 6 months, he was dead. His will was proved 5 years later, and it was announced that he had left £7,000, a surprisingly small sum, but the Messina cash deposited in London banks by the brothers amounted to some £70,000. This was frozen by order from the Treasury. The law continued its battle with the Messinas. Three weeks after Carmelo's deportation, on April the 9th, 1959, Attilio was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for procuring Mrs. Edna Kalman in 1949 and living on her immoral earnings. She earned £40,000 for the ring in the 10 years she worked. Kalman was separated from her husband when Attilio first met her in 1947. She was then 29 and a dressmaker. Attilio used the same technique to recruit her as the other brothers employed to lure women into their web. After being treated to all the customary luxuries, Kalman, by August 1949, had become cowed and subdued. It was then Attilio proposed that if she wanted to go on living a rich life, she would have to take to the streets. He introduced her to Robina Torrance, who taught Kalman the profession. Kalman was installed in a flat in King's Yard, Mayfair, and provided with a maid. She was subjected to the 10-minute rule, which governed all the Messina girls. That was the maximum time they were permitted to devote to a client. If the client stayed longer, it was the maid's duty to knock at the door. Kalman was later transferred to a flat in Bond Street, and Attilio, unknown to her, began watching her as she solicited in the streets. She had been earning about £120 a week, but her health deteriorated, and her earnings began to drop to about £50 a week. Attilio was displeased, and she was forced by threats of violence to work harder. Kalman was a tragic figure, desperately in need of help. She managed to make contact with her mother and stepfather, who had been searching for her, but Attilio never allowed her to see them unless he accompanied her. Kalman made none of the vast profits promised to her by Attilio. All she ever received from him was about £7 a week for her food and clothes and free telephone calls, a small gold watch, a bracelet, a radio, and a cheap fur coat. He showed her no mercy. Constantly he taunted her about her ill health and used to shout, "I could get a 17-year-old girl to work harder than you do, and I could sleep with her as well." For Edna Kalman, the 10 years she worked for the Messina ring was a period of slavery. A friend advised her to leave Attilio, but she was far too terrified to do so. Her break finally came one night when she called the police to a flat occupied by another prostitute below the one in which she herself was living. The other prostitute was having trouble with a client. Attilio, ever vigilant, saw the police arriving, flew into a temper, and yelled at Kalman, "I'll deal with you tomorrow." In a state of complete terror, Kalman fled to the home of her friend. Messina was livid. He traveled to Derby, to the home of her parents, who had no idea of Edna's real occupation. He told them that he and Edna had had a silly little argument, and that while he had been at work, she had vanished. They knew nothing of her whereabouts, and Attilio returned to London. He searched for her and eventually discovered her hideout in London. He sent Robina Torrance to fetch her, but Kalman's friend kept her hidden, and after Torrance had departed, they drove to the Derby home of Kalman's parents. Completely broken, their daughter told them the whole story of her 10 years' degradation and fear. They went to the police, and Attilio was arrested 5 days later. To support his story that he was unconnected with vice and was in fact an antique dealer, he attempted to divert the attention of the police to a dingy shop he had in Fulham. All the articles in the shop were dust-covered. The price tickets were yellow with age, and there was no evidence to show he had ever made a sale. He walked from the dock at the Old Bailey on April 10th, 1959, to start a 4-year jail sentence with the words of the recorder, Mr. Gerald Dodson, ringing in his ears. You made a sumptuous but revolting living from the suffering bodies of the women you trapped, seduced, and reduced to a form of slavery. You caused great suffering, and it is only right and just that you should also suffer. The recorder said that he would leave the order recommending Attilio's deportation to the Home Office. He added that Attilio was to be deported after serving his sentence, but it was up to the Home Office to decide whether or not he should be given an early release so that he could be deported sooner. That same year, the Italian government agreed to accept responsibility for Attilio and Eugenio, the latter, when he was released from prison in Belgium. Salvatore was living in Switzerland, and Alfredo, the only brother who could reasonably claim British nationality, was living in Brentford, where he was to die in 1963 at the age of 62. The year 1959 saw the final disintegration of the Messina Empire, and certain residuals still remain. I learned in 1967 that Eugenio and Salvatore are still paying the rates on premises in Mayfair which are used by known prostitutes. Legislation introduced after the Wolfenden Committee reported, new laws have driven prostitution in London into the underground. No longer are the girls on the streets. Instead, they offer their services as masseurs, as teachers of languages, as photographic models, or prowl about in small cars. It seems that the scum which the Messinas spread over London and some provincial cities still exists in small pools. The man who sat at the table opposite me in the Printer's Devil, a public house in Fetter Lane, wore dark glasses. His grey Trilby hat threw sufficient shadow over his face, partly to hide the scar of a razor slash, which had needed 78 stitches to draw the flesh together. The year was 1962, and I was drinking with a man who was then working at a factory bench for £15 a week, a man from the past. The notorious Jack Comer, better known in the British underworld as Jack Spot. My meeting with Spotty had been initiated by him. His purpose was to try to sell me information, but his role as a grass was as ill-fitting as a size 9 shoe on a dwarf. The man who had once been feared by many criminals was now a pathetic relic of an era that had long since passed. The names of Jack Spot and Billy Hill had been coupled in newspaper headlines, but off the front page, the enmity between them created a high-voltage atmosphere in the London underworld that frequently led hard crooks to leave town in a hurry. Spot and Billy Hill, the latter styled himself boss of Britain's underworld, emerged from a period of London gangland confusion in the late 1940s and 50s. After the wartime internment of the Sabinis, several gangs, including the Bill Black Mob, Benny the Kid and his boys from the East End, and the Elephant Gang, shared the control of London. By 1947, the Black Mob began slowly poaching upon the preserves of other gangs, and it was at this point that Billy Hill, who had gathered a few useful characters around him, decided to move in, smash the Black Gang, and run the underworld in an orderly fashion. The takeover battle that Hill promoted could only have been carried through by a man of courage, and Hill had courage plus brains. He was, and is still, a man with a great deal of ability, and had his intelligence been channeled into commerce in his early days, He could, at his present age of 58, have been a highly successful and respected businessman. Although he openly boasted that he was arrested for only a tenth of the crimes he had committed, an examination of his record must cause speculation as to whether, in these days of new thinking on penal reform and the handling of juvenile delinquents, his attitude towards society could have been reorientated and his criminal career halted at an early age. In his book, Boss of Britain's Underworld, published by the Naldrit Press Limited in June 1955, he recalls how he was caught burgling a house in Golders Green in 1927 and sentenced to 3 years in Portland Borstal. He escaped from there with another man, and they broke into a nearby house, attacked a housemaid who surprised them, and was soon recaptured. Hill was sentenced to 9 months hard labor and 12 strokes of the birch. A memory of that time, which he cannot erase, is of being shut in a tiny cubicle and forced to pound decaying animal bones to powder for use in fertilizers. The stench of the bones made him vomit over himself, and he comments, "All they did was make an animal out of me. Who cared? No one. Do you think I was in love with society when I came out?" Today, Billy Hill would pass in a crowd of commuters moving out of the city of London during the rush hour. Many of the hard lines in his face have softened, and his appearance is that of the stereotyped, desk-bound businessman. When he made his successful bid for control of the underworld in 1947, he was 36. And had served a total of 17 years in Borstal institutions and prisons. Even in his early days, after splitting the proceeds of robberies with accomplices, he made from his ill-gotten ways £200 a week as a professional thief and burglar. He was born in Seven Dials at the end of 1911, and when the First World War broke out, his parents moved to Netley Street, Camden Town. He came from a very large family and confesses that from his infant days he was a thief. He had a sister, Maggie, who was one of the finest shoplifters in London. She served many sentences in Holloway Prison and married one of the best screwsmen of the day, Brummy Sparks, from whom Hill admits he learned a lot. Billy's brother was a pickpocket, and his father, mother, and other members of the family were villains. The Hill home was a meeting place for crooks. As with many other criminals, Hill's career started with thefts from street barrows, and he was only 14 when he first chivved another youth with a pair of scissors during a juvenile gang fight. His first conviction came in 1926, when he was sentenced to 5 years in a reformatory for screwing a tobacconist's kiosk in Regent's Park. The sentence was so savage that shocked local people launched a petition of protest, and a 2 years period of probation was substituted. He went to live with one of his sisters and obtained work with an electrical firm. One day, when his employer gave him £50 to purchase equipment, Hill vanished with the money. Later, he worked in a greengrocer's shop and at the same time teamed up with his sister and her husband and broke into various houses that were unoccupied for brief periods. Then came his arrest for the Golders Green offense and his period in Borstal at Portland. He was released on license in 1931 and immediately bought himself a set of housebreaking tools. Within a week of leaving Portland, he had pulled off 2 jobs, and after only 7 days' freedom, was arrested in Maida Vale, London, NW, charged with being a suspected person. He was found guilty and sent to Wandsworth Prison for 9 months. When he came out, he organized his own gang in Camden Town and established his headquarters in a flat, claiming that he was the leader of the best screwing gang in Great Britain. Certainly he was a tough boss who quickly learned the art of chiving. His advice was that a razor should always be swept down the face and not across, and thus avoid the danger of severing an artery. That's all for this episode, my friends. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.